computer. There we are. I've started record.
Okay, brilliant. So I think that's all from me. I shall hand over to Gill.
Yes, and I shall start away and hope that I can let people in as I go. But welcome. It's absolutely brilliant to see you all today on a very bright and sunny day down here in Southampton. I'm praying and hoping that broadband and electricity and all the rest of the stuff works and that you can all hear me. But we're very, very warm welcome. Now, if I was, no, why isn't that working? There we go. So if I was with you in a room, I would then ask you what bee this is, what species of bee this is. But because I'm not, I can't. But if you would like to put something in the chat box and see if you are right. But it's a beautiful, fluffy, gorgeous, iconic bumblebee. And most of my presentation is just pictures of bees. So here's another one. So if you want to put in the chat box what you think that bee is, we can check at the end of the presentation. Before I start, I'm going to just tell you a little story, really. And this is about a place in China where they have thousands and thousands and thousands of acres of pears and plums and apples, all sorts of orchards. And over the decades, they have tried to stop the bugs damaging their fruit. But in order to do that, they've had to spray pesticides and insecticides. And sadly, they have now had to pollinate by hand a lot of the time, because not only have they killed the bugs, but they've killed the pollinators as well. And you think, well, that couldn't possibly happen in this country. But not a lot of people know that we actually import 70,000 boxes of commercially farmed bumblebees every year into this country to service our soft fruit industry. And it has to be bumblebees, because bumblebees, there are certain fruits and vegetables that only bumblebees can pollinate. And oh, where's it going? So this is what our tomato industry looks like at the moment. And every tomato, the 100% of the tomatoes that you buy in the supermarkets, it is down to bumblebees, because they have this amazing ability to buzz pollinate. And buzz pollinate is a really clever way. Plants and bumblebees have evolved together over the millennia. Now, I've got a short video about buzz pollination. Judith, you will have to tell me if the sound doesn't work, but I'm very hopeful that I've done it right and we can start it. Let me just pop that. Can you hit thumbs up? Fantastic.
This buzzing is a secret password, the key to a lock. What this bumblebee is after is pollen. Bumblebees eat pollen. It's high in protein.
Oops.
But the flower doesn't want to give it to just anyone. So it hides it away in those bright yellow anthers. For a flower, that's unusual. Most flowers keep their pollen on the outside of the anther, which is the male part of the flower. Pollen is basically sperm for plants. Most flowers make sugary nectar, too. They use it as bait to attract bees and other pollinators, which get coated in pollen along the way. And since bees are messy, they inadvertently scatter some of that pollen onto the female part of the next flower they visit. That's how most flowers have sex. But this type of flower doesn't offer nectar. The only way to get to its pollen is through those tiny pores at the ends. But the bumblebee?
Yeah. Oh, sorry about that. Every time I admit somebody, the video stops. So I'll just go back and restart it.
Attract bees and other pollinators.
Oh.
Which get coated in pollen along the way. And since bees are messy, they inadvertently scatter some of that pollen onto the female part of the next flower they visit. That's how most flowers have sex. But this type of flower doesn't offer nectar. The only way to get to its pollen is through those tiny pores at the ends. But the bumblebee knows just what to do. It wraps its legs around the flower and bites down on the anthers, that male part of the flower. See those wings shaking? Normally, the bumblebee uses those powerful muscles to flap its wings. That's what makes the buzzing sound when they fly. But here, those muscles vibrate its whole body, so hard and fast that it makes a louder, higher-pitched buzz. This vibration shakes up the pollen trapped inside the anthers until it spews out all over the bumblebee. It's called buzz pollination, and you don't need a bumblebee to do it. A tuning fork will do. The bumblebee grooms the pollen down into sticky sacs on its legs, carries it back to the hive. Only a few types of pollinators, like bumblebees, are capable of buzz pollination. Honeybees can't do it. This field is kind of a free-for-all. Think Las Vegas buffet. Tons of food, but long lines. Lots of competition. Buzz pollination is more like a private club. By only permitting pollinators that know the secret knock, the flower ups the chances that its pollen will end up on flowers from the same club, the same species. The bumblebee? Well, sure, it has to work a little harder, and there's no sweet nectar. But it's a reliable pollen stash that almost no one else has access to. Tomatoes, potatoes, blueberries. All of these need buzz pollination to reproduce. Much of the food we eat owes its existence to that buzz.
Let me just get more people in. It's lovely. So what's really beautiful about a bumblebee, it's got a head, thorax, abdomen. Its thorax is a massive muscle, and it has a very clever way of disconnecting its wings from that muscle and vibrating its muscles. And it's co-evolved with those plants to buzz at exactly 400 hertz, which releases the pollen from it. It's a really clever thing. And sometimes, particularly at this time of year, when you see bumblebees maybe lying on the grass in the cold morning, shivering, they're shivering to warm themselves up through that vibration of their muscles. And these are just some of the crops that we use the imported bumblebees to pollinate now in this country because of their declines. So why are bumblebees declining? Well, just after the Second World War, we lost 97% of all our wildflower meadows. Everything went down to food production, as it rightly was. We were all hungry, needed to grow food. Over the years, the UK has expanded in population. We've got a finite amount of land. So we've gone into the monocultures. We've got into agriculture intensification. Now, farmers, we work with farmers all over the UK. They really, really do want to help wildlife, but there's a real balance to get between feeding this country and growing as much food as they can on a finite amount of land and keeping land for wildlife as well. But that's the main reason why bumblebees have declined, is through a loss of habitat. Now, a lot of you will have heard of neonicotinoids. So neonicotinoids is a systemic insecticide, usually a seed coating, usually on oilseed rape. But neonicotinoids is another one. Neonicotinoids is really like bayoneting the wound. So we lost all the habitat. That's the main reason. That was in the 40s and 50s. Neonicotinoids didn't come into being until the 90s. So it was just another thing that made the decline in the bumblebees worse. It has a sublethal effect. And also these lovely creatures that we rely on wholeheartedly for all our soft fruit, these come in through European without viral testing. They could bring in pesticides and diseases of their own. And we worked very closely with some university people about how we could minimize the risk of these imported bumblebees. And hopefully this will give you just an insight into some of the work the Trust has done. No, that's not going to work. Okay, just go back a minute and see if I've got that. There we go.
My name is Peter Greystock, and I use cutting-edge molecular techniques to explore the effect parasites can have on vital pollinators like bumblebees. There are over 250 species of bumblebee, and many have been showing declines for decades. It's likely that the introduction of parasites from commercially imported bumblebees may play a role in this. Bumblebees are imported on an industrial scale to help pollinate a number of important crops. But my PhD research showed that these commercially reared bumblebees were often infected with parasites upon arrival into the UK. If these parasites are passed on to native populations, they can cause serious harm. Through my research with the Bumblebee Conservation Trust, I developed methods using DNA technology to detect if the parasites in imported bees could pose a risk to our native bumblebee and honeybees. In response to my findings, Natural England will no longer allow non-native bumblebees to be imported into the UK from 2015, a policy which will significantly reduce the risk posed to native bees. Norway has also banned imports outright until suppliers can prove their bees are no longer infected. Further funding from NERC and Natural England has allowed me to start developing a screening process which could be used by those breeding and importing pollinators. This would ensure excellent standards of parasite detection across the industry. Detecting and understanding the harm parasites pose to pollinators has been pivotal in changing bumblebee import regulations, improving standards across the industry, and increasing public awareness of the role bumblebees play in nature and in agriculture.
Just let in a few more people. Okay. So a little bit about why bumblebees are declining and why we should care about them. This sort of slide always makes me feel a little bit anxious, because I think we should value creatures for their intrinsic value, not just for what they can do for us. But however, some very clever scientists at Reading University worked out that if we were to lose all our pollinators, and that includes bumblebees, honeybees, and solitary bees, it would cost this country in the region of £691 million. So that's us getting a free service worth £691 million that provides us with our food. And it isn't just our fruit and vegetables. If you think about all our dairy products, cows don't just eat grass. The pastures are full of herbs and clovers. So it's really important for the quality of our milk and our dairy products. And then we just think about all the other creatures that rely on the fruits and the seeds from pollination, the birds and the dormice and the voles and the shrews. So pollination is what's called an ecosystem service, and it provides the colour, it provides what our land looks like, our countryside and our garden looks like. It's such an important ecosystem service. So I'll talk a little bit about what bumblebees are. Hymenoptera, but it's just our biological word, but they're social insects, so they live together in a colony. They're also flower visitors. Obviously, that's where they get their food from. And they're very hardworking. So bumblebees evolved in the Himalayas, and that's why they've got those big furry coats, which means that they can start very early in the morning and they can go to bed very late at night. Whereas honeybees, I think, have a much narrower range of temperature in which they can work. So in the UK, we've got about 250 species of bee, 25 bumblebees, 1 honeybee, and all the rest are solitary bees. So there's over 220 solitary bees in this country. And now you know why I didn't study solitary bees. It's bad enough with the bumblebees, but trying to identify all those solitary bees is for the experts. And our bees get nectar from flowers. That gives them their fuel to fly and protein for growth. And they have an annual life cycle. I always do this one. If there's any journalists on board, these are the people that really need to see this slide, because so often we get articles in papers, national papers, where they talk about wild bees, and there's pictures of honeybees and honey, and then we have pictures of articles about honeybees and pictures of bumblebees. But for our bumblebees, they nest underground. About 18 social species and 6 cuckoo species. And I'll come on to cuckoo species later. 50 to 400 in a colony, whereas in honeybees it's about 50,000. They don't dance, they don't do that lovely waggle dance that honeybees do, but they do have smelly feet. Only the queen survives the winter. It's an annual life cycle. And as I've said, they're mainly struggling due to flower shortages and habitat loss, whereas with honeybees, it was all to do with the varroa mite. I've got a little video here. This is a BBC one, so I'm just going to stop the recording for a moment. Sorry, I forgot to resume recording. They look after the queen, they clean the nest, so they do all the work. And now she will keep laying eggs that become workers right up until about June time. And then she'll lay what's unfertilized eggs. And the unfertilized eggs are the males. And the males do 2 really important things. They have sex and they get drunk. Either order, doesn't matter which. But you will often see in June and July a bumblebee splayed out on a flower head early in the morning. That will be a male, because once it's left the nest, it doesn't go back to the nest. What it will do is it will go and find another bumblebee nest to hang around outside, because later on in the season, the queen will lay more fertilized eggs, which will be the new queens. And the males will wait until the new queens have been born, and then they will mate with those new queens. And then once they've mated, then the new queens will go into hibernation. They've been pre-mated, and the rest of the colony will die. And that'll be the old queen, all the workers and the males, they all die. It'll only be the new queen that survives. In this little bit of ID, just to get your juices flowing for bumblebees when you go out in your gardens and your woods, when you first start looking at bumblebees, and these are our most common ones here on this slide, you always look at their bottoms first. What colour is their bottom? And so we've got a white tail, buff tail, and a couple of red tails here. And the common carder is our ginger bee. It's very, very familiar. Once you've looked at their bottoms, you look at how many stripes they've got. And that way you can begin to identify which bumblebee is which. We have a big 7 now. And this is the tree bumblebee. And some of you may have seen this in your woods. About 10 years ago, a bit of an apocryphal story. Somebody said it came over in Dave Goulson, a bumblebee guru in this country's boot of his car, but it came over from France. And it used to be called the Ooh La La bee because it came over from France. But it's exploited a niche that our native bumblebees haven't. And that is, it likes to nest in trees. It likes to nest up high, and it will find tip boxes or bat boxes or under the eaves of your roofs. So it's very specific in where it likes to nest, whereas our native bumblebees like to nest either underground or in tussocky grass. Then it's a very easy bee to identify, that white bottom, ginger thorax and black abdomen. No other bee is like that. A little bit about the work of the Trust. So we started in 2006, 2 professors at Stirling University were doing some research into bumblebees, and they found that they were in serious decline. And some of you may have heard of Professor Dave Goulson. He was one of the scientists. He's written some really brilliant books, Sting in the Tail, A Buzz in the Meadow, Bee Quest. They're really worth reading, super books. And he and his PhD student Ben Darville decided that they would develop a Bumblebee Conservation Trust to try and engage people to start supporting and reversing the decline of these bees. And so the trust was born. It started off with about 7 employees. We've now got 45 employees. We're widespread across the UK, and lots of projects, particularly in our rare bee areas. We also do policy. You saw the work. We're a science-based, evidence-led charity, so it's very important for us, the research part of it. We're what's called trusted advisors to the government, and we sit on the pollinator advisory steering groups for the 4 devolved countries, and we've helped them develop their pollinator plans. Public engagement, this is one of our big strands that we do, what we're doing today, get people out, get people interested and inspired by bumblebees and taking action for them. And also we're very good on giving information. So we've got lots of different booklets and leaflets about bumblebees, and most of them are free and you can download from our website. And adding to knowledge, we can never know enough about bumblebees and how well they're doing. And it's really important for us to know that the interventions that we do make a difference and that we are working to ensure their future. So we do work very closely with a lot of universities, and we take on students, and hopefully they help us with our research as well. Habitat provision. So this is our big strand. This is the work that we do mostly, and that's work with anybody across the country, anybody who's got some land, and we've worked exclusively with farmers, the National Trust, the MOD, even the MOJ has got a lot of land. So we work very closely with them to provide habitat. And this is just some of the work that we're, just a couple of pictures of farms that we've done on. But here we are. Now we're getting on to those. Sit up, take a cup of tea. This is all about your lovely, gorgeous woodlands. So when we think about bee-friendly habitat, we often think about sunny, flower-filled gardens or meadows with a variety of colourful blooms and busy, buzzy visitors zipping between them. And indeed, some of our most important habitats for pollinators, providing them with nectar and pollen they need to survive, naturally, this is where all the attention goes in terms of creating and restoring habitats to help them. But when we look at the big picture, we start to understand how habitats connect with each other, and connectivity is really important, and woodlands can play an important part in connecting those flowery areas that we know. And access to the right kind of woodland habitat is sort of central to the success of many species' life cycles. So woodlands can play their role, definitely play their role in reversing the decline of bumblebees. At a landscape scale, they serve an important function, offering pollinators important shelter, respite from intensively managed agricultural land. So they really are good for bees. Now, one of the things about managing your wood for bumblebees, and I'm appreciative that this doesn't apply to every woodland, but as with all habitats, the value of woodland sits on a scale. Densely packed conifers, no good. Plantations, they offer the least value, whereas diverse natural woodlands with a good variety of species and structure offer the best opportunities. And that light bulb in the corner is to remind me about light. Light is the commodity that's most in demand for woodland plants. And this is the main thing that needs to be managed to maximize the potential for pollinators. Often the only flowers in woodlands are those that adopt the strategy of flowering before the tree canopy closes in. So rides and glades, this is a lovely ride. The same edge habitat principles apply to woodland rides and glades. It's a really important aspect. If you can make your rides wide enough to allow light through. Make it as wide as you possibly can. Make it as wide as the height of the trees, the surrounding trees. Again, coppicing and cutting vegetation back periodically is important to maintain the optimum light levels. I know this is difficult, all woodlands are different. I went to visit a terrific woodland before COVID with Angus, Judith, and there was such a variety, such a mosaic of different areas. You know, there was rides, there was coppicing, and we found the most enormous bumblebees. I don't know whether he ever told you, but it was just brilliant. We walked in the gate into the wood and there was a queen bumblebee. It was absolutely brilliant. So opening up lights allows for all these plants, primroses, dog roses, brambles, wood anemones, violets, bugle, you know, it's gorse, honeysuckle, and ivy. I don't know how you feel about ivy, but ivy is such a tremendous food. No, it's such a brilliant thing. The ivy mining bee that comes out in September, you know, it's such a good food, but I can understand that not all of you will encourage ivy in your woods. As I said, on our website, we have some information about hedges and edges and your edges of your woodlands. And this will give you some ideas about the edges of your woodlands. South and east facing edges tend to be preferred by pollinators as they receive the morning and the midday sun, which warms them up. The north facing spots are utilised when the weather is too hot and dry. So good edges, unmown, unkempt, providing opportunity for important herbaceous species like hogweed, thistles, ragwort, ooh, another brilliant plant that everybody hates, and knapweed to grow before transitioning along a gradient into an area with taller herbs, shrubs and flowering trees. So there's many wildflower species that pop up naturally with the right management. The beauty about woodlands is that, you know, if you cleared something, you just leave it and then foxgloves come up and bluebells come up. You don't actually have to plant or buy seed or anything. It just happens naturally. But I suppose the key management with anything on hedges and edges is lowering the nutrient status of the soil by taking cuts. So, because grass will dominate. So if you can cut late summer and remove any arisings, that will help the nutrient level. Wood meadows. Some of you may have heard about wood meadows. So I've put up the Wood Meadow Trust here. This started for me, the wood meadows, the knowledge about wood meadows started about 4 years ago when I was invited up to an estate in Selby near York, Hag's Wood. And they had this piece of agricultural land that they wanted to make into a wood meadow. And I hadn't heard of wood meadows before. And it's a very interesting concept about having very wide open meadow areas within a woodland. And it's grown up over the years, and now it is superb. I'm going up there again in a couple of months, I hope, to see how it's grown over the years, but worth looking and understanding about wood meadows. George Peterkin, he said the general point is that meadows are good habitats if they have shrubs at their margins, and woods are good habitats if they have grassland among the trees, particularly grassland that allows herbs to flower. And at Hagwood's Trust has recently demonstrated we can carefully employ concept of wood meadows to link, promote and publicise small-scale habitat mosaics. So interesting concept. I understand now that there's other wood meadows popping up over the place, but useful to go and have a look at their website. And this is just a lovely picture of a bumblebee going into a foxglove. Look at the size of that tongue. So our bumblebees, one thing that makes them really good pollinators is that they all have different length tongues. So some bumblebees have 2 millimeters, and one bumblebee, the garden bumblebee, has a tongue 19 millimeters long, which means that they can pollinate a much wider variety of flowers than a honeybee, all of which have very short tongues. But lovely, lovely picture. So just a little bit about nesting sites. So nesting sites in woodlands is really good. Lots of dense vegetation, disused underground burrows. These all provide really good nesting sites for queen bumblebees. Bare sandy banks, exposed soil faces, dead wood and log piles, damp areas with mud and shallow standing water, all important for all sorts of bees, not just our bumblebees. So woodlands can be really brilliant places for bumblebees. And as I said, the wood that I went and visited pre-COVID was buzzing with them. Just another gorgeous picture of a bumblebee. And yes, this is a white-tailed bumblebee. I've got my last video. Let me just turn off because this is also recording. I'm old enough to remember, you know, my mum saying to me, oh, we're going to make a beeline to that. So I think we knew even before we put a transponder on their back that bees flew in straight lines, but fascinating nonetheless. And this is again just another lovely picture of a bumblebee pollinating a tomato flower. I was just going to tell you about their smelly feet. So bumblebees, as we've seen earlier, take a lot of energy to lift up and fly. And as with that video, they're within 40 minutes of starvation when they're on the wing. So what they do, if they go to a flower and they take the pollen and the nectar, they'll leave a pheromone scent on the petal. So when another bumblebee comes along, it will smell that pheromone scent and it'll know that the pollen and the nectar has been taken, and it won't waste any energy landing on that particular flower. So that's why they've got smelly feet. So a little bit to wind up about what we can do to help bumblebees. Obviously, as woodland owners, there's a lot you can do within your woods to make space for bumblebees. In your gardens, it's the old-fashioned flowers. It's the alliums, the herbs, the lavenders, fruit and veg. Just on our website, we have a fantastic tool called Be Kind with over 700 of the best flowers for bees. And there's some of them are super flowers as well because they've got very high quality nectar, and you can sort it by color, by month, by season, by petal number. It's a fantastic resource. It's all free. For gardening clubs, we often start up a sort of competition who's got the most bee friendly garden. Once they give you a score, and then they give you 10 more flowers that you could plant in your garden to make sure there's something flowering throughout the bumblebee season. So really, really useful tool, as I say, all free. And then next year, if you plant the right flowers, you can score your garden again to see if it's increased. This is probably one of the most important things. So every year, somebody will come up to me and say, how are the bees doing, Gill? So without Bee Walk, I wouldn't be able to answer this. So back in 2010, we started our the Bee Walk scheme, which allows us to collect data on bumblebees. So it's a citizen science scheme. So we train people in bumblebee identification. They go off and set their 1 to 2 kilometre route, can be anywhere from their house, their local dog walk, wherever they choose to do it. And once a month, they walk around and they note down the bees that they see and what they're feeding on. That data then goes back into our computer. So when we started in 2010, we had about 35 bee walkers, which didn't give us enough data to have any sort of significant analysis. This year, we've probably got now over 650 bee walkers spread across the UK. Really important. This is the core work. This is what enables us to monitor whether our work at the Bumblebee Conservation Trust is working, our interventions and our work with people is working. And our Bee Walk reports you can download and have a look on our website. But if anybody wants to become a bee walker, again, just pop that in our website and you'll have all the details there. We do online BID training, and we have a support officer, Helen, who looks after and helps our bee walkers. Of course, you can join us. It's a mere £25 a year to join us. Fabulous charity, obviously. Bumblebees absolutely essential. If you're going to enjoy pizza tonight, you'll have to thank the bumblebees for that as well. about 2 days ago, last week, Thursday, we launched a campaign called Be the Change. And this is something we've done 18 months of research as to what micro actions people can do to help our bees. And so these are very small things, not necessarily about gardening. It might be just talking to somebody about bees, or looking and taking a photograph of a bee, or there's something for everybody. If you go on our Be the Change, if you click on Be the Change, you'll be able to see all the different small tiny actions that people can take that will make a huge difference to our bumblebees. Fantastic campaign. We've already had 10,000 hits over the last 2 days on our launch video, so hopefully it's going to make a big difference to our bumblebees. And so this is other areas. Could talk to children. It's the next generation. I go into schools, there's all the little children sat around on the floor, and I say, what do you know about bees? They only know 2 things. They sting and they make honey. Oh, and by the way, male bumblebees don't sting, so you can pick them up and handle them freely if you learn to identify them, because the sting is part of the ovipositor, the egg-laying mechanism, so only the girls have a sting. So I try to talk to children to inspire them to begin to love bees and not be frightened of them. You know, our bumblebees, they're more interested in getting food than they are ever stinging. They're non-aggressive creatures. Obviously, you can leave a legacy. For most charities, and it's hard to say this, particularly in a pandemic, so apologies if it hits a nerve, but it's the way most charities can survive, with people leaving money for them in their wills. Volunteering, become a bee walker, gardening, work for a company that has Charity of the Year, ask a friend to support the bumblebee, have really big rides in your woods. I just popped that in especially for you guys, and obviously have a look at Be the Change. So Jane Goodall is a bit of a heroine of mine. I think what she's done for nature is fantastic, and we all can make a difference, however small it is. And that's a goodbye from me and a goodbye from her. And she's raising her leg like that because I've got too close. And she says, please don't come any closer. I'm frightened. Go away. So that's a warning mechanism that she's waved. Anyway, I'll stop sharing and I'll stop. Let me stop the recording. Stop.